The dessert plate sat half empty when Susan's voice cut through the Saturday evening quiet. Frank, I want a divorce. Annie and Sarah, forks paused midair, stared. My mind went blank, the familiar kitchen tilting. Then she added, with a detached calm that chilled the room more than any frost, I've found someone else, and we're going on a trip around the world. You won't be needing the house. It had been a regular Saturday evening, the kind that settled into a comfortable rhythm around the kitchen table. Annie, my daughter, sat across from me, and beside her, Sarah, Martha's girl, picked at her pie. Sarah was often with us, her mother working the late shifts down at the hospital. Susan had just placed the last slices of apple pie, still warm from the oven, on the counter. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples usually filled the room with a sense of quiet contentment. Susan turned from the counter, a plate still in her hand. Frank, she said, her voice even, almost conversational, I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, solid and unexpected, like a misplaced piece of furniture in a familiar room. My fork, halfway to my mouth, paused. Annie and Sarah looked up, their eyes wide, then darted to me, then to Susan. The pie on my plate suddenly seemed unimportant. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, pressing in on us. I tried to make sense of what she had said, to fit it into the frame of our Saturday dinner. What are you talking about? I managed, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I glanced at the girls, their small faces reflecting the sudden chill in the room. This wasn't how you talked about things, not in front of them. Susan met my gaze, her expression unreadable. I've found someone else, she continued, as if explaining a grocery list, and I want to spend the rest of my life with him. She picked up her own pie plate, though she made no move to eat. Her words were precise, each one landing with a quiet finality that left no room for argument. My mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. An apartment, I mumbled, my voice rough. I'll find an apartment. It was the only practical thought that surfaced through the haze. A place to go. She shook her head, a small, dismissive gesture. No, she said, you'll have to keep the house. I won't need it. Her tone implied the house was merely an inconvenience, a detail she was graciously leaving behind. We're going on a trip around the world, she added, her eyes now on Annie. But Annie, at her age, can't afford to miss all her schoolwork. A trip around the world. The words echoed, hollow and mocking. That had been our dream once, years ago. Long nights planning routes across old maps, saving pennies for a future we had built together, country by country. Now it was her plan, with someone else, and Annie was just an obstacle to be accounted for. The irony settled in my stomach, cold and heavy like a stone. I couldn't listen to any more of it. I pushed back my chair, the scrape against the linoleum loud in the sudden silence. Without another word, I walked out the back door, leaving the half-eaten pea and the quiet, watchful girls behind. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and late-blooming petunias. I went to the shed, retrieved my pruning shears and gloves, and walked toward the rose bushes that lined the fence. Each snip of the shears felt like a small, futile protest against the unraveling of everything. My hands moved from habit, trimming the spent blooms, shaping the thorny branches. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps on the grass. Annie and Sarah stood beside me, their small figures silhouetted against the dimming light. Annie picked up a pair of smaller shears I kept for light work, and Sarah simply started pulling at the stray weeds around the base of the bushes. Neither of them wore gloves. Be careful of the thorns, I warned, my voice flat. They'll prick you. Annie didn't look up. Be careful, Dad, she replied, her voice soft, focused on a thorny branch. I watched them, their quiet concentration a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. Where's your mother? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She's upstairs packing, Annie said, without missing a beat, as if packing for a trip around the world while leaving her husband was the most normal thing in the world. A wave of helpless anger washed over me, hot and sudden. My hands felt strangely heavy. I dropped the shears, the metal clattering on the paving stones. The sharp sound made both girls jump. Come on, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Let's go get some ice cream. It was the only distraction I could think of, a small, sweet reprieve from the thorns and the packing. The next morning, the silence in the house was a physical presence, heavier than any noise. It stretched from one empty room to the next, a profound quiet I hadn't known in all the years Susan and I had lived here. The usual sounds, the distant clatter of her coffee cup, the soft rustle of her turning newspaper pages, were gone, replaced by a vacuum that resonated in my ears. I found her note on the kitchen counter beneath the fruit bowl. It was concise, typewritten, not even her handwriting. It listed the name of her lawyer, instructions for forwarding mail, and a few sentences about division of property, all very neat and businesslike. There was no goodbye, no I'm sorry, not even a thank you. Just practicalities, laid out like a legal brief. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Annie picked at her cereal. I watched her, steeling myself for what I had to say. Honey, I thought, I started, trying to keep my voice even, a steady anchor in the sudden storm. Your mom won't be living with us anymore. The words felt inadequate, hollow, failing to convey the seismic shift that had occurred. Annie's small spoon clinked against the bowl. She looked up, her blue eyes wide and questioning. Is Mom mad at me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question twisted something in my chest. It was a child's instinctive leap to blame herself. I reached across the table, taking her hand. Her fingers were small, cool. No, sweetie, I said, my voice thick with emotion I fought to suppress. She's not mad at you. This isn't your fault, not even a little bit. It was the hardest thing I'd had to say in a long time. Later, I called Martha. Sarah left kind of suddenly last night, I began, my voice measured. Susan, well, she left too. There was a pause on the other end, a quiet intake of breath. Martha didn't press, didn't ask for details I wasn't ready to give. I'm sorry, Frank, she said, her voice soft and knowing. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all, at all. Her quiet support was a small, steadying hand in the upheaval. The first week after Susan left blurred into a monotonous cycle of paperwork and appointments. My lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, spoke in terms of custody arrangements and asset liquidation, his clinical language stripping every last shred of human emotion from the situation. He spoke of my life, my marriage, my family, as if they were mere financial transactions. It was all so methodical, so distant from the ache in my gut. At home, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Annie. I cooked dinners, simple Midwestern fare, meatloaf, baked chicken, green bean casserole. Susan had never been much for domesticity. Her idea of dinner was often takeout or whatever I cobbled together. Now the burden was entirely mine, and the kitchen felt both foreign and strangely intimate as I fumbled with recipes. Annie, usually a chatterbox, was quieter than usual. I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table drawing. Her pictures were usually vibrant, full of colorful stick figures and sunny houses. Lately, they featured a house, sometimes our house, sometimes a generic one, but always with one figure missing, a noticeable blank space on the porch or in the yard. It was a quiet kind of grief. Lying in bed at night, the empty space beside me was vast. Susan's side of the bed, once warm and bearing the faint, familiar scent of her shampoo, was now cool and impersonal. The scent was fading, just like the memories, becoming more indistinct with each passing day. One evening, while I was helping Annie with her homework, she looked up, her brow furrowed. Dad, she said, who's the new man? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't spoken about him. Susan hadn't either, at least not to Annie. She must have overheard something, pieced it together from hushed adult tones, or perhaps the remnants of Susan's phone conversations. Just someone your mom knows, I managed, trying to sound casual, though my jaw felt tight. I tried to reach out to a few old friends, men I'd known since college. The conversations were strained. They offered platitudes, careful words, and the pity in their eyes was almost unbearable. They didn't know what to say, and neither did I. Sometimes, to escape the quiet tension of the house, I took Annie to the local diner. The familiar clatter of plates, the smell of frying bacon, the easygoing chatter of the waitresses. It was a small comfort, a pocket of normal in the bewildering chaos. We'd sit in a booth, Annie sipping her chocolate milkshake, me nursing a coffee, both of us finding solace in the routine. The sheer weight of solo parenting was settling in. School runs in the early morning fog, deciphering third-grade math, reading bedtime stories with a voice that sometimes cracked from exhaustion. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a complete redefinition of everything I thought I knew, a tearing down of the foundations of my life, leaving me to build something new from the wreckage. In the days that followed, small details that I'd overlooked began to surface, sharp and distinct in my memory. They had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, like shadows in familiar corners. Susan's late-night calls, her voice hushed, retreating to the other room. The sudden errands or committee meetings that took her out of the house for hours. I remembered her coming home, sometimes with a flushed excitement I hadn't seen in her for years, brushing off my questions with vague answers. Then there was the watch, a new one, expensive, sleek silver with a black face. She'd worn it for a few months before she left. When I'd asked about it, she'd just shrugged. Oh, just a treat for myself. Retail therapy. At the time, I dismissed it, pleased she was finding some small joy. Now it felt like a silent accusation. Martha called, her voice soft, laced with concern. Frank, honey, she'd said. Susan's been different lately. Sarah mentioned she saw her at the grocery store looking, well, she said she seemed almost giddy, not like herself. Martha's words confirmed a vague unease I'd been ignoring. Other people had seen it too, the change in Susan, a brightness that wasn't meant for me. I started looking for clues. Not actively, not with a magnifying glass, but I'd sift through her things, the remnants of her life left behind. Old purses, drawers in her dresser, the back of the closet, anything she might have forgotten. A crumpled grocery list, a receipt from a coffee shop I didn't recognize. Things that meant nothing on their own, but felt heavy with implied secrecy. Then I found it, tucked beneath a stack of old magazines in a wicker basket in the living room, a small linen handkerchief. It wasn't Susan's style at all. She preferred paper tissues, practical and disposable. This one was delicate, with an embroidered initial, a flowing C stitched neatly in one corner. It felt out of place, a whisper of something clandestine, a sinking feeling intensified in my gut. Cold and precise. The someone else Susan had spoken of wasn't just an abstract concept, a convenient excuse. He was real. He had a name, a face, and he left behind embroidered handkerchiefs. I thought back. Susan had mentioned a new colleague at the community center where she volunteered. Carl. She'd said he was helping her with the annual fundraising gala. He's very organized, she'd remarked once, a casual observation that now felt charged with hidden meaning. That night, after Annie was asleep, I got in my truck. I didn't plan it. It was an impulse, a raw need for confirmation that pulled me out of the driveway. I drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets of our town, the street lights casting long, distorted shadows. The community center was on the edge of town, a modern brick building that usually hummed with activity. Tonight it was dark, save for a single security light over the main entrance. I parked down the street, killed the engine, and just watched. The lot was nearly empty. Then I saw it. Susan's silver sedan, parked at the far end, tucked in beside a dark, unfamiliar car. A sedan, maybe a Toyota or a Honda. They were parked a little too close, a casual intimacy in the deserted lot. My heart started to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I waited. After a while, a light flickered on in one of the downstairs rooms of the center. I got out of the truck, moving carefully, quietly, staying in the shadows. I walked closer until I could see through the large, uncurtained window. And there they were, Susan, and a man, his back to me, but I knew it was Carl. They were standing close, talking in hushed tones. Then he reached out, pulling her into an embrace. Her head rested against his shoulder. He ran a hand through her hair. It was a soft, tender gesture, the kind you share with someone you love. The sight hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me gasping for air. All the doubts, all the question, dissolved into a cold, hard truth. There was no denying it, no rationalizing it away. This wasn't just a someone else. This was Carl, and he was standing where I used to stand. I drove home in a daze, the familiar Midwestern roads blurring into indistinct lines under the streetlights. The quiet hum of my tires on the asphalt was the only sound in the suffocating silence of the truck. When I got home, I went straight to the phone. I called Susan's cell, knowing she was probably still with him. Carl, I said, my voice tight, barely recognizing it as my own. His name is Carl, isn't it? There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. Yes, Carl, she finally replied, her voice defensive, cold. What difference does it make now, Frank? The confirmation brought no relief, only a deeper, sharper sense of betrayal. It was like finding a broken fence post in a long-trusted field, knowing that something you relied on had been compromised, broken from the inside out. Once Carl's name surfaced, the divorce proceedings shifted gears, accelerating from what Susan had initially painted as an amicable separation into a contentious legal battle. Her lawyer, a sharp woman with a cold demeanor, painted me as controlling, overbearing, and financially stingy. It was a narrative designed to dismiss Susan's infidelity, to make me out to be the reason she sought solace elsewhere. The truth was twisted, reshaped to fit their agenda. My primary fight was for Annie. Susan's talk of a trip around the world loomed large, a casual threat to Annie's stability. I refused to let her wanderlust dictate our daughter's life, her schooling, her sense of home. Annie needs structure, I insisted to my own lawyer, Mr. Henderson. She needs her friends, her routine. As the financial disclosures came in, a new layer of betrayal unfolded. It became clear that Susan hadn't just made an impulsive decision. She had been systematically moving money, quietly siphoning funds from our joint accounts, setting up new ones I knew nothing about. It was a calculated, deliberate unraveling of our shared life, meticulously planned before she ever uttered the word divorce. The financial statements laid bare years of subtle deceptions, hidden assets, small withdrawals that, when combined, amounted to a significant sum. The fight was exhausting, a constant draining of my energy and spirit. There were days I felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep ache that went beyond physical tiredness. But Annie was my anchor, her small hand in mine, her innocent questions about why Mom lives somewhere else now, forcing me to keep going. I had to be strong for her. Susan, now openly with Carl, seemed emboldened by her new freedom. She arrived at court hearings with him, sometimes with a defiant smile. Carl, a man in his late 40s, perhaps early 50s, with a confident, smooth-talking air, a regional manager for some investment firm, was always impeccably dressed. I recognized him immediately from that dimly lit window at the community center, the memory of fresh sting each time I saw his face. He'd nod politely, sometimes offer a small, insincere smile, as if we were merely acquaintances at a social gathering. Annie began to notice the tension in the air. "Why does Mom look mad when she sees you, Dad?" she asked one afternoon after a contentious school pickup where Susan and I had exchanged terse words. My heart ached to shield her from it all. "It's complicated, honey," I'd explain, trying to find child-friendly words for legal battles, for anger and heartbreak. Sometimes grown-ups disagree even when they care about each other. It's not about you, okay? But the stress weighed on us both. Her drawings still featured houses with missing figures, sometimes with a storm cloud overhead. The judge eventually ruled on visitation. It was a compromise, as most legal decisions are, but it felt like a loss. Susan was granted significant freedom, allowing her to take Annie for extended periods, even out of state, provided she gave sufficient notice. It was less restrictive than I had hoped, leaving a window open for that trip around the world fear to persist. The legal fees mounted rapidly. Mr. Henderson's bills arrived with relentless regularity, each one a stark reminder of the escalating cost of dismantling a life. To cover them, I had to sell some family heirlooms. My grandmother's silver tea set, a small antique desk that had been in our family for generations. Each piece sold was a quiet sacrifice, a small part of my past chipped away, and the sting of it was sharp. I started attending a support group in a church basement on Tuesdays. It was a room full of strangers, men and women, mostly men, in varying stages of quiet heartbreak. We sat in a circle, sipping lukewarm coffee, sharing stories of broken trusts and shattered futures. There was no easy comfort, no quick fixes, but there was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of a common burden. It was a relief to be in a place where pity was absent, replaced by empathy. Martha, God bless her, became an even stronger presence. She'd drop off casseroles, call to check on Annie, offer to pick her up from school when I had a late court date. Her quiet, unwavering friendship was a lifeline. I felt the hard edges of justice every day. It was not always fair, not always what felt right, but it was final. The rulings, the paperwork, the legal jargon, it all created a new, unyielding framework for my life. One I was forced to navigate whether I liked it or not. Life settled into a new routine, raw and still unfamiliar. Each morning was a scramble, getting Annie ready for school, making sure she had her lunch, her backpack. Then it was off to work, the demands of the office feeling heavier now, a direct link to the bills that kept piling up. I often felt stretched thin, like an old rubber band pulled too taut. Annie struggled with Susan's sporadic visits. Promises of faraway trips, whispered plans for next summer, often fell through or changed at the last minute. Susan would call, full of apologies, blaming Carl's work schedule, or a sudden change in travel plans. Annie would just nod, her small face mirroring a quiet disappointment that broke my heart a little each time. I learned to braid Annie's hair. It started as a clumsy attempt, my fingers fumbling with the fine strands. But with practice, it became a morning ritual, a small victory in the daily domestic battle. Her head, smelling faintly of apple shampoo, would rest against my chest as I worked. A moment of quiet connection before the day began. School functions and parent-teacher conferences became solo affairs. I'd sit in the plastic chairs, a quiet observer among the couples, feeling the subtle absence of a partner. I'd nod to the other parents, exchange polite small talk, but I was always alone, a single figure in a landscape designed for two. I watched Annie play with Sarah in the backyard, their laughter a bright, clear sound against the quiet hum of our new life. Sarah's steady friendship was a small island of normal, a constant in Annie's shifting world, and I was deeply grateful for it. Martha, of course, continued to be a silent rock. She'd offer a knowing nod when our eyes met, drop off a warm casserole on the porch without fanfare, her kindness a steady presence. My small garden became my refuge. I'd spend hours out there pruning the roses, weeding the flower beds. The physical work was a welcome distraction, the repetitive motion a balm for my restless mind. The precise act of cutting away dead growth felt symbolic, a quiet, necessary process. One evening while we were eating dinner, Annie put down her fork. "Dad," she said, her voice small, "why did Mom pick him over us?" The question, direct and piercing, hung in the air between us. My fork clattered against my plate. I struggled for an honest answer that wouldn't damage her perception of her mother, wouldn't poison her memories. "Sometimes," I began, my voice measured, "grown-ups make choices that are very hard to understand. Choices that hurt other people. But those choices are about them, honey. Not about you. Never about you." It felt inadequate, but it was the best I could do. To give her an outlet, to help her navigate the confusing landscape of her emotions, I enrolled Annie in a summer art class at the community center. She loved to draw, and I hoped the colors and shapes would give her a voice for what she couldn't articulate. Money was tighter now. The legal fees had depleted my savings, and maintaining the house on a single income required careful budgeting. I started taking on extra shifts at the plant, the long hours stretching into the night, leaving me exhausted, my muscles aching. The quiet hum of the machinery became the soundtrack to my new reality. Sometimes late at night, I'd pull out old photo albums, pictures of Susan and me, young, laughing, unaware of the future, a ghost of my past life caught in glossy prints. I'd stare at them, wondering where the warmth had gone, how two people could drift so far apart. Annie, sensing my exhaustion, would sometimes bring me a juice box when I came home from a late shift, or a crayon drawing of our family, the figures carefully colored in, a small, insistent reminder of what still mattered. I found an unexpected strength in my unwavering commitment to Annie. It was a quiet, resolute love, a deep current that ran beneath the surface of my weary days. The weight of Susan's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in my chest, but the daily tasks of fatherhood, the urgent needs of a growing child, pushed it into the background. Life went on, whether I was ready or not. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Months turned into a year, then a little more, Annie and I found our rhythm, a quiet life built on resilience, and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The house, once filled with a palpable absence, began to feel like home again, filled with Annie's laughter and the comfortable hum of our shared routines. News of Susan and Carl trickled back to town, as it always does in small communities. Their world trip had been cut short, less grand than the pronouncement Susan had made at our dinner table. Apparently, it had been a tour of a few Caribbean islands, followed by a month in a coastal town in Florida, rather than the globe-trotting adventure she described. More modest, less glamorous. Then, word came that Carl's job had transferred him, not to some bustling city, but to a smaller town a few hours north, a place known more for its cornfields than its opportunities. Susan had to adapt to this new, diminished reality. Martha, ever the discreet observer, would sometimes share a casual observation. "Saw Susan at the grocery store last week," she'd say, stirring her coffee. "She looks different, not quite the same sparkle." The shine, it seemed, was wearing off. I heard through the grapevine that Carl had lost some of his influence at his company. The transfer to a smaller branch, the shift from regional manager to a more localized role, meant his big city ambitions were being replaced by a smaller town reality. The news came without satisfaction, just a quiet understanding of life's unpredictable turns. One afternoon, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. It was Susan. Her voice was hesitant, almost a little strained. She was asking for advice about a local plumber, a recommendation for a good mechanic in town. Something mundane, something practical. It was a strange moment of vulnerability, an echo from a time when we used to share such small details. I kept the conversation brief, distant. My answers were clipped, factual. I wasn't willing to open old wounds, to let the past seep back into the present. There was a politeness in my tone, but also a firm boundary, a clear demarcation that our lives were now separate. Annie, meanwhile, seemed more settled. Her laughter returned, bright and unburdened. Her drawings, once featuring houses with empty spaces, now depicted our home, full of colorful figures, including a smiling version of me. The storm clouds had lifted. I found myself with a little more time on my hands once our rhythm became more steady. I started volunteering at the local library a couple of evenings a week, shelving books, helping patrons find what they needed. It was a quiet kind of work, and I found a new sense of community there, a connection to something beyond my own small world. That's where I met Eleanor. She was a librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, a few years older than me. She shared a quiet passion for old books, for the forgotten stories tucked away in dusty corners, and for the rich history of our small town. Our conversations started slowly, about authors, about local events, then gradually eased into more personal territory. Her voice was soft, her presence calming, a welcome contrast to the recent turmoil in my life. I realized slowly that I was starting to heal. The raw edges of my grief were smoothing over, scar tissue forming, making me stronger than I had been. It wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the pain, making it a part of who I was rather than defining me entirely. I learned to appreciate the small, everyday joys, Annie's conspiratorial smile over a shared secret, the quiet evenings on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. These were the moments that filled the spaces Susan had left empty. More news arrived about Carl's company, downsizing, layoffs. It meant additional financial strain for Susan, another layer of struggle in her new, less adventurous life. There was no satisfaction in it for me, only a confirmation of the unpredictable nature of things. Through it all, I held on to the belief that decency, in the end, would find its own quiet reward. It was a quiet conviction, one I carried in the steady beat of my heart. Annie entered adolescence, bringing with it a fresh set of challenges and, more profoundly, a new depth of understanding. The simple, unquestioning acceptance of her childhood gave way to observation and quiet reflection. She saw the stark contrast between my steady, predictable presence and Susan's often flaky contact, the missed calls, the last-minute changes to plans. She noticed, too, the difference in our two lives, the comfortable stability of our home compared to the transient nature of her visits with Susan. I, in turn, found myself more comfortable in my single life. The raw wounds had healed, leaving only a faint ache, a kind of scar tissue that strengthened me. I reflected often on the nature of marriage, on what I might have done differently, what unspoken expectations I had carried. It wasn't about blame anymore, but about understanding, about the quiet complexities of two people trying to navigate a life together. Eleanor continued to be a gentle, consistent presence. Our relationship was a slow-burning comfort, built on shared quiet moments, walks in the park, evenings spent reading in companionable silence, conversations about books and the small, overlooked details of life. There was an ease with her that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Annie started to confide in me more, her teenage candor cutting through the polite silences we'd maintained around Susan. One evening as we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight, she startled me with her directness. "Dad," she asked, her voice soft, "did Mom ever regret leaving?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. It was a loaded question, one I'd asked myself 1,000 times. "People make choices, Annie," I said, looking out at the fading light. "Sometimes they don't see the path ahead clearly. Sometimes they think they know what they want, and it turns out to be something different." It was as honest as I could be without casting a harsh judgment on her mother. Susan and Carl appeared at a school event a few weeks later. Annie was performing a short piece with her drama club. They sat a few rows behind me, looking a little strained, their public demeanor less assured than it had been in the early days of the divorce. I observed them from a distance, my gaze lingering on Susan. There were lines of weariness on her face that hadn't been there before, a subtle tension around her mouth. She looked tired, a little faded. I found myself feeling a flicker of something akin to pity, not revenge, not satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared human frailty. We all make choices, and we all live with the consequences. It was a cold realism, a recognition that happiness, like everything else, is often harder to maintain than it is to acquire. Eleanor, with her quiet wisdom, helped me realize that I no longer carried the anger. It was gone, replaced by a memory of what it felt like, a shadow of an emotion. "You've moved past it, Frank," she'd said one afternoon, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "That's a good thing." Annie learned more about her parents' history, not from me, but from Martha. Martha, who had known us both for so long, offered a more complete, nuanced picture of the sacrifices I had made, the stability I had fought to preserve. It wasn't a deliberate effort on Martha's part to sway Annie, but simply the truth, told with a gentle understanding. I considered selling the house sometimes. It was big for just Annie and me, and the upkeep was a constant demand. But Annie's attachment to it, her sense of roots in this place, kept me grounded. "This is our home, Dad," she'd say, a simple statement that held the weight of her quiet endurance. In the garage, I started a small woodworking hobby. I'd spend hours out there, the scent of sawdust filling the air, shaping simple, sturdy pieces of furniture. A small bookshelf for Annie's room, a new plant stand for the porch. It was tactile, satisfying work, building something durable with my own hands. The concept of paying the price seemed less about dramatic downfall and more about the quiet, daily erosion of happiness, the subtle weight of choices that accumulate over time. It wasn't always a sudden crash, but a slow, almost imperceptible wearing away, like a river carving stone. Years had passed, softening the sharp edges of the past, making them duller, more distant. Then a health crisis befell Martha, bringing us all back together in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the regional hospital. Frank, Susan, and Carl. The tension was palpable, thick like humid summer air, but it was overshadowed by a shared, silent concern for Martha. Susan sat across the room looking noticeably older, lines etched around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. She avoided my gaze, staring instead at the chipped tile floor. Carl, beside her, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual smooth composure replaced by a fidgeting restlessness. Annie, now a young woman, tall and self-possessed, sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm, a quiet anchor in the charged atmosphere. Her presence was a comfort, a testament to the life we had built together. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor came out, offering good news. Martha was recovering. She would be fine. Relief washed over us all, a collective sigh. Later, when Martha was awake and receiving visitors, she shared a moment alone with Susan. I wasn't there, but Martha recounted it later, her voice dry, a glint in her eye. "You made your bed, dear," Martha had said, looking directly at Susan. "Hope you're sleeping in it." It was a classic Martha line, direct and without pretense, cutting straight to the bone. Carl approached me in the waiting room while Susan was still with the Martha. He offered a stiff, awkward apology, his voice low, almost a mumble. "Frank," he began, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry. For everything, for how things turned out." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, his gaze flicking away, then back. I listened, nodding slowly. I felt no need to reciprocate, no urge to offer forgiveness or absolution. The wounds were too deep, the past too etched in my memory for simple words to erase. The apology was a gesture, perhaps for his own conscience, but it changed nothing for me. "It is what it is, Carl," I said, my voice flat, leaving him to sit with his discomfort. A little while later, Susan found me alone in the hallway outside Martha's room. The hospital corridor was quiet, the antiseptic smell sharp in the air. "Frank," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt Annie." Her eyes, when they finally met mine, were clouded with something I recognized as regret. "But you did, Susan," I replied, my tone even, devoid of anger or accusation, just a simple statement of fact. "And you hurt yourself too." I saw the full weight of it in her eyes, a quiet understanding of the life she'd traded for a fleeting passion, the true cost of her choices. The sparkle Martha had once observed was long gone, replaced by a deep weariness. She was living the consequences, not in dramatic ruin, but in the quiet, constant burden of regret, and the distance that had grown between her and her daughter. Annie, who had walked up silently and stood a few feet away, seeing her mother's distress, stepped forward. She didn't say anything, but she reached out, offering Susan a small, hesitant hug. It was a moment of unexpected grace, a quiet act of compassion that cut through the tension. I thought of Eleanor, of our steady, uncomplicated love, the gentle rhythm of our shared life. A profound sense of gratitude washed over me, a quiet, deep warmth. I had chosen a different path, and in that moment, I knew I had chosen well. The hospital hallway, usually a place of sterile efficiency and hushed tones, became a silent stage for a decade of unspoken truths, of choices made and lives altered. I walked away from that encounter not with a sense of triumph, but with a settled peace. I had seen the full circle of choices and consequences, and understood that sometimes the price paid isn't in grand gestures, but in the quiet daily erosion of what could have been. Martha made a full recovery, a testament to her stubborn spirit and the good care she received. We gathered at her home a few weeks later, a smaller, more intimate group than the hospital waiting room assembly. Martha, looking frail but determined, sat at her kitchen table, a strong cup of coffee in her hand, her eyes missing nothing. The connections, though frayed in places, had endured. Susan and Carl were still together, living a quieter life in that smaller town. Their grand ambitions, the world trip, the glamorous future Susan had once envisioned, had long faded into the reality of Carl's downsized career in a suburban existence. I heard they still traveled some, but it was to predictable resorts, not the exotic locales she'd once dreamed of. The shine was definitely gone, replaced by the dull patina of routine. Annie, now a young adult, thrived. She was a thoughtful young woman, marked by her past, yes, but not defined by it. The resilience she'd shown as a child had matured into a deep well of empathy. She pursued a career in social work, drawn to helping families navigate the kinds of brokenness she had experienced. She spoke with a quiet wisdom that belied her years, a testament to the strength forged in adversity. Eleanor and I married in a small, intimate ceremony at the local courthouse. Just Annie, Martha, and a few close friends as witnesses. There was no grand fanfare, no elaborate reception, just a quiet celebration of a love found later in life, a steady, unhurried connection that felt entirely right. Our home, the same house I had shared with Susan, was now filled with a new kind of warmth and peace. Eleanor brought her quiet grace, her love of books, and her gentle understanding, making it truly our home. I often thought of Susan, not with bitterness anymore, but with a detached sense of what if? What if she hadn't made those choices? What if we had found a way through? The questions were rhetorical, not accusatory, just reflections on the myriad paths a life could take. I knew the scar of betrayal would always be there, a part of my story, a reminder of what had been lost, but it no longer defined me. It was simply a part of the landscape of my past. Annie maintained a respectful but distant relationship with her mother. She would call on birthdays and holidays, sometimes visit for a day, but there was a clear boundary, an acknowledgement of the past, but a resolute living of her own future, separate from her mother's choices. She understood that some things, once broken, can only be mended so far. I continued my woodworking in the garage, the scent of fresh-cut lumber a constant companion. I crafted simple, sturdy pieces, bookshelves, tables, frames, each one reflecting the honest, enduring values I now embodied. There was a quiet satisfaction in creating something tangible and lasting. I taught Annie about the value of patience, the quiet strength found in enduring hard times. We'd sit on the porch, watching the vast Midwestern fields stretch out to the horizon, unchanging, steadfast. It became a metaphor for my own life, for the resilience of the land and the people who worked it. My contentment wasn't found in grand adventures or fleeting passions, but in the steady rhythm of a loving home, a meaningful moi, and a life lived with integrity. The story wasn't one of explosive revenge, but of the quiet, inexorable consequences of choices made and the enduring power of a father's love. Life continued, a testament to the quiet strength found in the heartland, where truth eventually finds its way to the surface.